Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming and of course Dauntless. You see, lately Rage, Cotton and myself have been getting back into the game since we'd never properly sank our teeth into the Reforged update. It's been a lot of fun learning the game, but I found myself wanting to actually try all the weapons and get an idea of how they work. Originally I just picked up the axe and had finished most of the Slayer's path with that, but after going back to the basics and testing all the weapons, I learned a lot more about the core mechanics, as well as which weapons were really interesting and complex and which weren't. Plus, as a newer player coming from Monster Hunter, I was wondering what weapons would best suit the various weapon mains of Monster Hunter. What would you say an insect glaive main's best choice in Dauntless would be? Which weapons should a hammer main use? Oh wait, no, there's literally a hammer. Alright, let's get started with the weapon they give you the tutorial, the sword. This weapon is your classic builder and spender, but has two types of building and spending. We've got Overdrive and Valor. The idea is to use basic combos to build Valor, and then you spend that Valor on more powerful abilities and combos. We can shoot air slices through the air, or dash great distances with a follow-up strike, or leave tremors of damage on the ground. Then we have the Overdrive meter that we're building up. That's the other builder spender. Basically, whenever you land the final hit of a combo, you build Overdrive, and then when full, you can activate it. Suddenly, we're gaining Valor passively alongside the combos, and dealing AoE air slices on every basic hit. You're basically all juiced up. It's the go time period, where you can spam out special combos and abilities, and generally deal a lot of extra damage. Plus, during Overdrive, you can dash massive distances for just one Valor, which can work great for evading or gap closing. As Dauntless does seem to think, this is a very beginner-friendly weapon, and probably a good choice for learning the game. It's slash damage, so you can cut off parts easily. You've got big evasive movement, simple combos, and some ranged ability too. Interestingly, I would say this is a more unique weapon when we compare it to the Monster Hunter weapons, since there isn't anything I can one-for-one compare it to. So there's not exactly a direct link between a Monster Hunter weapon main and this one, and it's one of the two weapons in Dauntless that I can actually say that about. In any case, the sword is a good weapon to start the game with and use while you're trying to understand the game early. The monsters have a lot of rules, like when you can stagger them, which parts to attack, their movesets, and not having to focus on your weapon while you're learning to play will help you pay more attention to the monster you're actually fighting. But it's also an easy weapon to fall in love with all its mobility, the flashy combos, and it's got lots of cool looking swords to use too. If only it had a parry by default as part of its moveset, rather than being something you unlock in a special that's kind of debatable on using, then it would be great for a longsword player. Moving on from the sword then, let's talk about the weapon I picked up to start with, which is the axe. Instantly you can tell this was great sword inspired. It's literally a slow swinging, heavy hitting powerhouse that you charge attacks with. At its core it is the same thing. Charging up attacks can hold you in place, but provide hyper armor in trade to make sure the attack goes through. However, this charging weapon actually has a simple and wonderful ability to actually charge while moving, which is an absolute dream. So while it's very comparable to the great sword, there are some important mechanics that the axe players will need to know about that are new. Resolve, which is that super armor, and determination, which will increase the amount of damage you do. In essence, the axe only has three kinds of attacks: vertical, horizontal, and thrown. The vertical charge combo is the one that forces you to stand still, and after reaching 3 on the charge, you can release it for max charge damage and proc resolve, which is the super armor to ignore enemy attacks during your own. While horizontal charging is the one that lets you move slowly while still charging up, but it's only the vertical combo that can do the infinite chain slam attack at the end until you run out of stamina, which is kind of neat. It reminds me of the Switch Axe wide swings. Then you have that thrown attack, Flight of Ruin, which on first press will throw the axe at long range, dealing a bit of damage on impact, but can then be pressed again before it returns to you to do a huge axe slam for big damage. But then comes in Determination, which, like I said, will increase your damage. Determination originally has 3 levels. By landing charged attacks, you fill the meter at the top left, which when full can be consumed by landing a Flight of Ruin axe throw. That levels up your Determination and resets the bar. You fill it again, you Flight of Ruin, and do that until you're level 3, which will then provide a whopping 50% damage increase on all attacks. So it's vital that you get to level 3 as quickly as you can, and then maintain that throughout the fight for a max DPS. The axe is pretty simple in concept, but very effective and quite satisfying, letting you hit big numbers and deal powerful slashing damage so you can cut off parts. Obviously, the weapon is very comparable to the great sword and is probably a brilliant choice for any great sword main looking to pick a weapon in Dauntless. It's modified enough to feel different and have its own interesting utility, and like the sword, it should be easy to pick up and play as a beginner. It's a well-rounded weapon. Next up is the hammer, an incredible combination of cannon and hammer. It feels great, it looks great, and It's also pretty hard to play. Part of the difficulty comes with how the weapon is a blunt weapon type. That relies on the player knowing where to target the monster. The head, or in other cases the legs, if you have that perk unlocked. While being a slower and less mobile weapon, despite its cool blast jumps, I think this one could be more punishing to play as a new player. It's like a hammer and a gun lance in one. Essentially, you have shelling as part of its kit. The hammer blast can be tapped for short range pops of damage or charge for greater effect. That can be used to interrupt a monster. And similar to gun lance, you will need to reload. But it comes with a classic Gears of War style perfect reload minigame. You get a perfect reload by hitting the input at the middle of the bar at the right moment for a fast reload basically. And it does have some evasive maneuvers as well, where you can use the shells to jump or double jump by sprinting and then shelling, which is really good for moving around the fight. The hammer has 3 choices of combos: horizontal swings, downward slams, and uppercuts. The vertical slams and uppercuts are great since you're going to be less likely to accidentally hit anything but the head, and they do reach higher up too. But what's very cool about this hammer is how you can shell blast during every melee. So you hit both with the hammer and the blast of the shell at the same time. And then at the end of any of these combos, you can then use a heavy attack to fill the hammer up with any and all vials remaining for a massive smash and blast. And if you hit that, it overcharges the hammer, reloading instantly and buffing the power of the next vials for a period. So you're looking to hit head, shell and slam, overcharge, and do it all in the name of bonking monsters. So honestly, the hammer, when you consider its combination of melee and ranged, specific attack pattern combos, specific body parts you need to be hitting, and all the melee cannon blast weaving going on, I think it's fairly complex as a weapon. So that's probably why I think it's more of one of the difficult ones to initially pick up. Still, it's a very unique combination of hammer and cannon, and it's a very cool design. So I think Monster Hunter hammer players are going to have a great time with this, and naturally Gunlance players should be interested too. It's just a bit more bonk than it is poke. Overall though, very impressed with the hammer. Moving on to the next weapon, the War Pike, which is a lot simpler. It can do slash damage to deal good part damage, it can pierce damage to build up wounds, and then with the ability to target wounds with slashes for extra damage, it builds into itself really well. So playing around wounds and maximizing that damage seems vital to getting good output of this easier to pick up weapon. The main concept behind the pike is all about building up power and storing it into the weapon, which then can be used as a powerful single shot cannon. The more power you put in, the more damage that cannon shot will do. The pike blasts are able to even interrupt monster attacks like charges, so using your slash attacks to fill up the meter quickly, then storing powerful shots for ranged damage, playing around wounds you're creating with your pierce damage. There's various focuses to think about with the pike. The combo attacks are very quick and straightforward to apply. There's literally 4 lights into a held light to do a bunch of piercing attacks, or 3 heavies to slash a body part and build up meter to store. And that's as complex as it really gets with these combos. The pike does get an extra evasive dodge that looks very cool. It travels fairly far but will consume a good chunk of stamina, but you can use this to move around the monster constantly, which is very nice. Overall, it feels very easy to play and understand. Like I was saying earlier, if there's less pressure on the player to pay attention to the weapon, they'll pay more attention to the monster and have an easier time learning. The main thing to pay attention to with the weapon though is your stamina and trying to avoid being a bit too greedy at times. Basically, all attacks are going to hold you in place and they drain your stamina very quick. So you need to dish out damage when it's safe to do so and try not to overplay it so you don't get caught out. It's a simple weapon, but with various aspects to pay attention to that can make it fun and rewarding. As I'm sure all you Monster Hunter players are probably thinking, this is very similar to the insect glaive on the ground. It just doesn't have aerial movement, but similar standing combos that are ideally used when the monster is vulnerable. And I definitely can see glaive players getting a kick out of this alternative glaive. Even if the weapon combos are quite simple, the mechanics are reasonable. This is one of the weapons that I do hope sees a mechanics update at some point though. Next up then, it's time for the one and only dedicated ranged weapon of Dauntless, the OSTIAN repeaters. I say ranged, but these guns are actually best used close up to the monster, as close as possible really, because of the perks you get from that. Kind of like a bow with close range coating. This pair of pistols have some interesting effects and are the most moddable weapons out of the lot. Unlike other weapons you simply craft and then slot perks into, the repeaters have 4 parts you need to craft separately. The barrel decides which element you're doing, the chamber will decide which skill shot ability you have, The grip will decide your deployable ability, and lastly, the prism will decide which passive bonus you have. This concept is very appealing to me since you can radically change the way the weapon feels and plays and your role in a fight, depending on which parts you've actually equipped to the guns, which is very cool, and it makes it seem like the most versatile weapon in Dauntless because of it. As I mentioned though, it's a ranged weapon, so you're going to fire very simple basics to deal damage, but the further away you are, the weaker the damage you're going to be. You can see when you're in correct range by the crosshair. It turns red when you're in range or white when you're not in range. As expected, you'll regularly reload these weapons, but if you reload while close up to the monster, you kind of steal power from it and get an empowered reload. That increases the damage you do on following attacks for a period of time, so that's something you should try to maintain throughout the fight. The repeaters have two abilities to use: the chamber shot, which is based on the one you have equipped. I put on the one that creates a vulnerable spot where we do extra damage when targeting it, and then the grip deployable. In this case, I went for the one that provides attack speed when you pick it up. But yeah, these feel like a very interesting combination between the monster weapons, the bow, and the light bow gun. Since you're moving around fairly quickly, you're firing pretty fast, you're staying close to the target, it feels like a mix of both. So I think it's a good concept, and that should appeal to any ranged interested player for sure. But like the war pike, I wish the mechanics of this weapon were more interesting, since it's mostly just firing and reloading while pressing the cooldowns every now and then. The interest comes from builds and customization, while the moment-to-moment combat is less exciting. Alright, 5 weapons down, let's move on to a very familiar concept now. These are the chain blades, a dual-wielded weapon that deals lots of low damage blows, but constantly while critting and being agile as hell. So dual blade users, this should be familiar. The key difference here though is a lack of demon mode, and with it, more versatile movesets that allow you to swing these blades on the end of the chains for longer ranged hits with much wider reaching attacks. If anything, these are the iconic God of War chain blades, and I love that. What's really interesting about the chain blades though is how aerial it can be. Leaping long distances or up into the air, you have the ability to plunge back down or swing from up high, which is perfect for cutting off tails at reasonable safety. The goal is to stack Reaper's Dance by pulling to the target or pushing off and using the plunge attack. Each time you do that, you stack more and more Reaper's Dance. These stacks provide 40% increased damage to your other aerial attack, that huge double chain slam from up high, which can cut off parts. We have a dual blade style dash during demon mode, just permanently, so very good iframes on that. And as far as beginner weapons go, it's actually an interesting one. There's a lot going on mechanically, but to get maximum output, you need to be flowing around the fight constantly, juggling your stacks, breaking parts, and constantly swinging. To me, Chainblade seems like an easy one to pick up and appealing to a new player because it's flashy and you've got all those iframes, which makes dodging easier. But I'd say it takes a good player to really make them shine with their high output potential. But yeah, I have to admit, I've really enjoyed playing the Chainblade. It's probably the most out of all the new weapons I tried for this video. It just flows into itself really well. And obviously it feels very similar to the dual blades. So dual blade users, this weapon is 100% for you, and I strongly recommend it. And with that, we're now at the last weapon, the AETHER Strikers, or Strikers for short. This is the one that I talked about in my recent Should You Play Dauntless in 2021 video. It's the most recent weapon that was added to the game, and it has some very cool mechanics. With that, this is another blunt damage weapon, which means you'll be trying to target the head. This one's very focused on combos, and importantly, changing which combos you're using constantly. So unlike the chain blades, in which I could pick whatever combo felt best and just spam that, here we need to constantly change what we're doing. Essentially, each of the 3 combos will provide 1 mantra. You can have up to 3 mantras at once by successfully landing each of the 3 combos. The mantras can be spent on techniques. An attack speed buff at 1 mantra called Tempest Form. For 2, you can use the Karma Breaker, which is a powerful punch that can knock monsters down and deals damage over time after the initial hit. And for 3 mantras, you have the ultimate ability, the Adamant Bolt, a cannon blast from your hands from a pretty reasonable range too. Importantly, your Adamant Bolt will deal more damage if you've got the Tempest Form buff on at the time, or if you've hit the monster with Karma Breaker. If you've done both of these things and then do the Adamant Bolt, it'll do even more damage. Lastly, you also have the Surge Dash, which is refreshed whenever you generate mantras. It's a dash that punches the monster at the same time, looks very cool, and is also very important because it will refresh your mantra meter, which is constantly depleting, giving you more time to get to the next combo. So the Strikers will aim for the face, constantly build mantras for a variety of combos, and all at a very fast pace. You want to maintain your attack speed buff all the way. You want to use your karma breaker on the monster's face and do it all in a short window so your adamant bolts are hitting as hard as possible. The crux of this is enforced by the mantra bar, which, like I said, is constantly emptying at all times. Maintaining that is vital, and your window to do so is very short. I believe it can be extended though by the Slayer's path upgrades. Just like all the weapon concepts, the more you upgrade them, the easier it gets. But honestly, I love the concept behind the strikers. It's completely unique when we compare it to Monster Hunter. There's nothing I can say are one for one like it. So Dauntless has got itself an awesome weapon here that feels very much their own. And I'd say it's one of the harder weapons. Not only are you managing so much at once, you're using blunt damage, so you have to target specific parts as well. You're focused on managing your weapon, your timings, where you're hitting, and of course, what the monster's actually doing. So it's very rewarding, but probably brutal for a brand new player who doesn't really know the ins and outs of the game. Well worth the challenge though. They feel very strong and very fun to use. It's just a bit hectic. But there you have it, my experience with each of the weapons of Dauntless, how they work, and my general thoughts on each. For a direct Monster Hunter-like experience, I've got to say, they've done well to not just take Monster Hunter weapons. They have some unique stuff going on here. Like I say, there's no dedicated counter weapon like a longsword. There's no sword and shield. Nothing like a lance. You've got no bard or musical-based weapons like the hunting horn, no transformation weapons like switch axe or charge blade, and there's only one ranged weapon, which is mobile and fast-hitting, so it's not like it's a heavy bowgun. So while there are a couple weapons in Dauntless that are a bit unique, there are obviously ones I can directly compare. But overall, the weapons in Dauntless are not as complex as the Monster Hunter 14, but they do have a lot going for them all the same. To my understanding, more reworks are coming for the less interesting ones. From me, I would say both the repeaters and PIKE could do with a bit of a mechanical facelift. You know, just give them more combat options, maybe more combos, something. But yeah, after doing this, I have high hopes for Dauntless. I only had a vague idea of each weapon before, but after putting some real learning time in and actually going out and doing some hunts with them, I've been impressed with the whole roster. It's solid. There isn't a single weapon that I would avoid at all cost, and that's very good. Let me know your thoughts on all of this though. A fun question I had was if there was a weapon type you could add to Dauntless that's obviously not in now, what would you pick? I feel like a shield based something would be really good. Until next time then, I've been Hollow, you've been you. Thanks for watching.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.